This week in the AWS Developers Podcast, we're talking about trusted identity propagation. You have no idea what it is about? Stay tuned, we'll explain everything. Welcome to this new episode of the AWS Developers Podcast. We talk about identity and trusted identity propagation, more specifically with two experts. Joseph, you're based in Montreal, Canada. You're professional service consultant for professional service, and Raphael Koike, you're solution architect based in Atlanta in the US, and in the US in New York, a bit closer to me at least. We have Brooke Jamison, my fellow colleague, developer advocate. Thank you for being here, all the three of you. Maybe we can start with a very basic question. What is trusted identity propagation?
Hi, Seb. Hi, Brooke. Very nice to be here again. So trusted identity propagation, our tip, it allows organization to propagate the actual user identity downstream to AWS services. So it's a capability that stands within IAM Identity Center. And I would say that previously you would grant permissions to IAM roles. And now you can enhance this IAM role with the actual user doing the action. So it's no longer, I would say, a data analyst that is creating a database in lake formation. It's actually Joseph, the data analyst in the group of marketing that is performing the actions, and you can do authorization based on this.
Just wait a bit. So let me try to. There is a lot of different concepts here. First, if you want to understand about Identity Center, go back to listen the episode from 2 weeks ago, episode 132. We talked during 40 minutes about what is Identity Center. So what you're saying, in an enterprise scenario, I'm the end user, I use Identity Center. Before trusted identity propagation, I connect to a Redshift database, for example. I authenticate with single sign-on. I assume a role proposed by Identity Center. And all what Redshift knows, and the Redshift admin and the trace and the logs in Redshift, is that there is someone that apply for that role that connect to Redshift. But with Trusted Identity Center, it's my real identity. It's me. It's Seb from that department. And my identity is propagated down the stream to the actual AWS service. Did I understand what you meant correctly?
Yes, exactly. So the user ID that exists for you in IAM Identity Center, which is the source of identity in this case. So the user ID is added into every API call that you're doing after authenticating.
But why we want to do that? What's the challenge we are trying to solve for our customers?
Yeah, so I would say basically to get more fine-grained access control. And then if you want to give permissions to Joseph that Raphael don't have permissions, and we both are using the same role, you cannot do that. With the trusted identity propagation, now you can bring Joseph identity into the credentials, and then you can set those permissions into the application and say, okay, Joseph, you can access this table or this database, and Raphael cannot, even if you are under the same IAM role.
Yeah. How does trusted identity propagation reduce the complexity of IAM role management? Like maybe if you could give me a before and after comparison, or walk me through like a sort of flowchart user journey of what that actually feels like for people in that process, what it was like before and what it can be like with trusted identity propagation.
Okay, so I can give you another example using S3. So it's a common use case. You have S3 as your storage layer, and you want to write data into an S3 bucket. One of the challenges is, how can I give permissions to just Raphael to write data into an S3 bucket? So before tip, you have to write a bucket policy or use other constructs from S3 like access points to try to give a little more fine-grained access control. But you can hit limits in this way. So if I'm writing a bucket policy, I need to add every single user a new entry in this bucket policy, and this have a limit in the size of bucket policy. With TIP, with Trusted Identity Propagation, now I can use S3 access grants. That's a new feature from S3. And now I can give a direct permission to every single user or group to a specific bucket or prefix. So now it can be even more fine-grained access control to some services, things that sometimes you are not able to do, or it's too complex.
So typically that's not something developers are going to use. It's more something that system admin are going to configure once for all in the AWS account. And then once it's configured, we just forget about it.
No, I would say developers still want to build applications. And by the way, they do that today. But normally, if you are a developer, you are using AWS, you probably have built your application and authentication system, and probably have an API where you receive a request from your application using your identity, your users, and then this API will do the authorization.
The mapping. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the mapping. You are doing this today with API Gateway and some other constructs. With TIP, now you can say, hey, I don't need to proxy or map those authorizations. Now I can use TIP and AWS services to directly forward the identity from my user to AWS services.
Can we elaborate on that use case with API Gateway? Like Brooke asked before and after, what's the picture there? For an enterprise application, I mean, I'm writing an enterprise application, a web app that use API Gateway and Lambda function. What's the picture in terms of authentication for enterprise user before and after TIP?
Okay, so before TIP, you create your web application, for example.
Mm-hmm.
You add your authentication with Okta, Entra ID, or any other identity provider, right? And after that, you have your tokens that you use to access your own APIs. So let's say that you have an application that you need to access analytics report. This data is stored on AWS. Your web application will authenticate your user. You get this token, and you go to your API gateway, for example, using this token. You maybe use a custom authorization with Lambda in this API gateway, and then you map, okay, this user in my application have access to this report. So you are doing this construct in your API gateway. After that, your application probably have a backend, can be a container, a Lambda function, or an instance that will access the report. So you build your own authorization layer using your own token or your identity provider token. This is how you do before TIP.
Mm-hmm.
With Trusted Identity Propagation, now you can get this token issued by your identity provider. That's, by the way, it's still similar, right? The authentication process still remains similar. But now, instead of going, for example, to your API gateway and then authorize using some internal database or mapping system that you built, now you can just exchange this token with Identity Center and say, hey, this is the user Rafael, and this is my identity provider. You have set up this trust with Identity Center. I go to Identity Center and say, hey, I need to exchange this token with an Identity Center issued token. I get this token from Identity Center that now have this information about Rafael, and I go to STS, that's another AWS service, and say, hey, I have this token issued by the Identity Center, and I need to get credentials from AWS, IAM credentials, that's access key, secret key. Now, with this information from the Identity Center that we collected from the token issued by the application, I can get my IAM credentials, enrich it with the user identity, and I can make a request to, for example, Amazon Q, S3, and then they can evaluate if they will authorize or not this access based on the user identity that's enriched in this IAM credentials.
For a specific user identity and not for a generic roles. Okay, I think I got the large picture. We're going to dive into a bit more into the details. But before that, what are the benefits? We talk about a few already. We talk about the simplification of role management. But if you have to categorize the main benefits of enabling a TIP, trusted identity propagation.
One of the benefits that if we use the same use case that Raphael just presented, you have a service that is consuming data and having to check that the user is authorized to access the data. One of the first benefits is now your application does not need to have access to the data. It's only your user who have access to the data. So you're improving security and your security posture, because even the IAM role that is used by the Lambda function does not have access to the data. Only if it comes with the token from the user, it will have access to the data. So you're improving your security posture. That's one of the benefits. Another benefit is fine-grained access. Before, one of the challenges, not especially for data access, was like the matrix that you had. You had data analyst, data engineer, data scientist, and they would be in different teams, such as marketing, finance, corporate. And then you would have to create IAM roles for every use case, and the user could not use two roles at the same time. So now, you could not do like combination easily of access. Either you would grant too much access or too little. So you could not query the database in the way that you wanted. Now you have fine-grained access at the user or group level, so you can give a user which is access to multiple databases, and the user in the same teams could have different access to different databases and doesn't have to switch any IAM role. You can use the same IAM role. So that's a huge benefit.
It simplifies the user experience as well, because if I don't need to select my role after authenticating, I don't need to to sign out and re-signing to switch roles, for example.
Yes, you're losing your AWS session. So let's say you want to join two tables and you don't have access. You have one role for each table. You cannot do this join. You could maybe query the data, download it on your laptop, query it from switch role, query it, download that on laptop, and do the calculation on the tool on your laptop. Now with you have a single session, you're connected in your Athena console, and you can write your query, do the join that you need, and you have all the benefits and security and performance that are provided by AWS services.
Yeah, for sure. I did this in the last episode too, but one of my favorite hobbies when we have experts here on the podcast is to fact check Amazon Q. So I asked Amazon Q, what are the benefits? And it says, trusted identity propagation in IAM Identity Center offers several benefits, including auditability, simplified user experience, user privacy, improved single sign-on experience, secure access to AWS resources, and support for various OAuth 2.0 flows. I just want to call out in the answer, so these are like dot points and then they have sections after them, but in the improved single sign-on experience, it talks a lot about the analytics workflows that you were just talking about, Joseph. So it says AWS analytics services like QuickSight, Redshift, EMR, Lake Formation, and S3 via S3 access grants now use trusted identity propagation for managing and auditing access to data and resources based on user identity. This enables an improved single sign-on experience for analytics users when analyzing data, that seems legitimate. Do you have anything you would like to add to Amazon Q's answer here before I give it the thumbs up or thumbs down to say whether it did a good job or not?
I think you can give a thumbs up for Amazon Q. The auditability parts, so we mentioned it a bit earlier. When you are creating an AWS, so an IAM role session with trusted identity propagation, you see in all your CloudTrail logs. So CloudTrail is a service, an AWS service that logs all your activity in your AWS account. So you can see in every CloudTrail log a new field which is on behalf of, which contain the user ID as well as the identity center instance that was used to enrich or enhance this session.
So if I look at the logs, I get the real identity of the user, the person that was behind the keyboard, and not a role that was assumed, maybe my multiple employees or multiple person workforce, as we said, for organization. Going back to the Q answer, it listed, I don't know what pronoun I should use. It listed a list of AWS service where we can use trusted identity propagation. Can we validate what are the services that are available today where it's possible to configure that end-to-end identity propagation, knowing that we are recording this episode at the end of July 2024, and of course this list of services will continue to evolve over time. So if you're listening to this episode in the far future from now, in a few months maybe or later, please check the documentation for the current status. But as of today, end of July 2024, what is the list of service I can integrate with TIP?
Yeah, so on the data services, we have Lake Formation and S3 Access Grants.
Mm-hmm.
And for the analytics services, we have Redshift Query Editor, the V2, EMR Studio, Athena, and Amazon QuickSight with Redshift.
So it's very data oriented. In general.
Yeah. And GenAI, Q Business, the service that you can integrate with. And of course, you can build any custom build application using this new feature.
Yeah, and third-party vendors are also integrating their application. I wrote a blog post and I put the link in the notes of this podcast of how to integrate. I forgot what was the application. It was Salesforce, if I remember well.
Tableau, yes.
Tableau, sorry. Sorry. Let me repeat that because... And third-party vendors can also integrate their business application with TIP. I wrote a blog post explaining how to integrate Tableau down to Redshift and propagate the identity between Tableau user and Redshift. How does it work? Raphael, you gave a first overview when I was asking you about API Gateway. Can we dive into the details? Because it's much more than just a token exchange. There are multiple services at stake. So it's an audio-only podcast. Let's try to keep everyone with us. We cannot make a nice architecture drawing on a whiteboard. But let's start with the end user. I'm in front of an analytics services. I need to authenticate, and what's happening next?
So the first step would be you log out.
That's a very good advice.
So the flow starts actually in IAM Identity Center. That was I was doing the joke. So it starts within IAM Identity Center, and in the Access portal, you have your AWS accounts. So you leave that on the side, and you have your applications.
So and the application I have access to as user Seb, for example. Okay.
And for an analytics use case, let's say we are using EMR Studio. You will have one application for your EMR Studio environment. So you click on this on these links, and it opens an EMR Studio environment with your identity embedded in it. So at this point, the EMR Studio application has a JSON Web Token, a JWT. Associated with issued by IAM Identity Center.
Because this is where I authenticate. So there was a single sign-on.
This is where you started the flow, yes.
Scenario, but I start with Identity Center. So after the single sign-on with Okta or whatever, Identity Center issue a JWT token. I receive it, and we pass this token to EMR Studio in this example.
Okay. So now you are Seb in EMR Studio.
Okay.
And so if you want to interact with AWS services, you need to have an IAM role session. So you need to have AWS credentials. And in this case, EMR Studio will use its service role to request to the single token.
EMR, start again with EMR Studio.
Yeah. So EMR Studio will use its service role to request a new IAM role session, to request AWS credentials, and it will include in this request, in this assume role API call, it will include one field of the JSON Web Token, the identity context, which is included in the JSON Web Token issued by Identity Center.
And what service is distributing this temporary IAM credential? Is it STS or is it Identity Center or something else?
So it's STS. So we are going back into the IAM and the STS world, I would say. So you are asking STS to for credentials, and you add this set context API. You add this set context operation to embed the context from Identity Center into your session. So that's where you tell this user ID, and that the proof that comes from IAM Identity Center. This user ID is actually using this role.
So it means that the application that integrates with trusted identity propagation tip must be modified to actually accept an Identity Center JWT token as input and exchange that token for a set of temporary credentials.
Not exactly.
Okay.
Maybe I should circle back to the explanation on the assume role operation. So I'll go back to the so EMR Studio, when it calls the STS API to do an assume role operation, it will include the JSON Web Token from IAM Identity Center, which is the proof of identity.
Yeah, it's me
STS,
showing, hey, I receive a token. Here's the token I have. Give me something in exchange.
Exactly. So that's really STS that will handle this part. And STS will analyze the token and say, okay, that's a token that is valid from IAM Identity Center. So I will return a session, a standard AWS sessions with access key, session token, and secret key. And with this session, I will also add one field, which is the on behalf of fields, saying that it's Seb that is using this session. And for the application downstream, such as Athena, for example, for the application downstream, what they see is an IAM role session, as usual. And this also see this on behalf of fields, and they will look at this on behalf of field to make the authorization decision.
And it means I can create, I'm sorry, I'm obsessed with developers. I can create an enterprise application as an enterprise developer. I can create my own application that will also use TIP to propagate the real user identity down to S3, for example, in my application.
One of the most common use cases that I saw in the past weeks is integrating with Amazon Q Business. So if you are a developer and you plan to use Amazon Q, for example, it's a great moment that you can get your application authenticating in your workforce identity and then exchange this token from your IDP with Identity Center, and using TIP, you can give access to Amazon Q. That's one of the examples that I can give. Another common use case, as I mentioned in the beginning, is using S3 with access grants, right? Where you can centralize your access control to your buckets and prefixes. So basically you can build your internal web application where users authenticate, and then they can have access to read and write data on S3.
Let's go back to that Amazon Q business use case. Maybe we can first explain what bit is Amazon Q business. It's an enterprise chat that a customer can build based on a custom data source, and we have dozens of connectors to popular data sources such as SharePoint, Dropbox, and many others. But if I created one of these chat and customize it for my business in the AWS console, the end user that will access it, my enterprise employees, needs to be authenticated. And so this is where there is a mix of authentication between my enterprise application and Amazon Q. Am I correct? So how does this identity integration works between my custom application and Amazon Q?
So in your custom application, you will need to use an O 2.0 identity provider to secure your application. And
so it might be Cognito, Okta, Ping.
It might be Amazon Cognito, Okta, Ping, Entra ID, any identity provider that supports O 2.0 and which is can be publicly verified. That's a key part. It needs to be publicly verified. And so your custom application has a proof of identity. And in IAM Identity Center world, you need to reconcile this user with the first identity provider with the with the user within IAM Identity Center directory.
Yeah, the challenge is on one side, I receive a token from Okta saying that I'm Seb. On the other side, there is a Seb defined in Identity Center as well. And we need to prove it's the same Seb, or we need to link these two identities to grant me access to Amazon Q.
So for this use case, IAM Identity Center provides a feature which is called Trusted Token Issuer. And it's quite common across identity provider to see this feature, where you can perform the token exchange flow. So in IAM Identity Center, you say, okay, my company is also using Okta, and I will trust tokens that are issued by Okta on my instance of Okta.
Okay.
So the user flow becomes, I'm authenticated to my web application using Okta, and the application will send the Okta token to IAM Identity Center to perform the token exchange operation. IAM Identity Center will verify that using the issuer URL of the token, that the token is correct. We'll verify that the issuer is allowed to perform the token exchange operation. So you have created the entry in your IAM Identity Center console. It will verify that the audience match the audience of the application that you want to use.
Mm-hmm.
And it will also verify that the IAM role doing the token exchange operation, so your application IAM role, is allowed to do the exchange. If all these conditions are met, IAM Identity Center will return an IAM Identity Center JSON Web Token. And
so
then you pick up
a second
the
token.
flow,
I receive a second token, but this one is issued by Identity Center and not Okta. And that's the one we can pass downstream to other services.
Just you pass it to STS to create
first.
Your identity and sessions. And then you have the last set of credentials, which are AWS credentials, with your user ID embedded in it. And then you call for Q Business, you call the chat sync API to start your conversation with your Q Business application.
With an access key, secret key, just like usual. It's the second time you mention an identity enhanced AWS session. So far, when I create an AWS session with STS, I receive access key, secret key, shared session key, and some expiration time. But now there is a fifth field added to the game, which is my user identity. So I know you mentioned it already, but I just want to emphasis on that because that's a new concept on AWS.
Yeah, but the credentials remain the same. So you still receive the same access key, secret key, and session token. The difference is now how this session store information about the end user identity. In the past, you don't have this information, and now it's embedded inside AWS, your user identity into those credentials. And then after that, anytime that you make a request on the AWS side remains the same, unless the service is identity aware, and then you can create those permissions using this enhanced IAM credential.
This additional field in the JSON that we receive.
I just want to note another thing. We're talking about developers and building applications, but there's another use case of trusted identity propagation that is the plugins that developers using IntelliJ, PyCharm, VS Code, and then you integrate with Amazon Q, right? And then you think, okay, how they know that I am Raphael using this IDE and give me access to my Amazon Q? So behind the scenes, there is this identity center with trusted identity propagation working on your behalf with your IDE to give access to your Amazon Q. So this is really cool.
That's a very valid point. If you are using one of the Amazon Q plugins inside your development, your IDE, you're already using trusted identity propagation. And that's why we have to connect with Identity Center at the start of a session. We have to authenticate, and we saw the authentication and the authorization flow.
Yeah. Probably even a little bit reiterating what you just talked about, but I want to make sure we really spell this out. So obviously user privacy is very important to everyone at AWS and our customers. So how does trusted identity propagation protect against user impersonation and unauthorized access to private data?
with trusted identity propagation, you have the knowledge of the user doing the action, so you can lock down your data source through S3 access grants or through lake formation grants to actual user, and you are not I would say constraining to an IAM role, which was the previous case. So if someone was able to impersonate a role, or if you build a custom application that is accessing S3 data, and you are relying on the IAM role of the Lambda function to access the data and your business logic to check if the user should have access to the data, if there is a flaw in your application, you might have a data leak that is happening because someone is able to access unauthorized data. If you implement trusted identity propagation, you add another layer of security, which is you are telling in S3 access grants that this individual user with this user ID is allowed to access only this prefix or this object. And even if the IAM role try to do many API calls to every other object in the bucket, it won't be able to do so. Because it's really, each operation will be validated for the user token.
Yeah. I want to add that get the authentication from your identity provider. That's the first step in this flow of trusted identity propagation. You can implement the mechanisms of authentication from your identity provider. So if you want to use MFA, if you want to use YubiKey, so any mechanisms that you have today will be used in this new flow. So then you can ensure that your enterprise policies for securing authentication will be in place, right? And then after that, we exchange the credentials or token with the trusted identity propagation and then move the flow on inside AWS. This is great. It's a great benefit because first, you are just consolidating your authentication with your identity provider. Second, you are increasing or enhancing your IAM credentials with now the end user identity. So now you can have visibility into CloudTrail. And third, you are authorizing your service directly to an end user that before is an IAM role. So if you think about those three key aspects, is
if you have to give one advice to the developers that are listening to us, where they can get started.
There is a lot of material that was already published, blog posts, and they will be on the link of the podcast. But there is a lot of materials, AWS samples, GitHub repo, with solutions ready to deploy, to experiment and discover how trusted identity propagation works, especially with the Q-Business application, because we see the chat use case to enrich an existing application or connect to your Slack environment is very popular.
And all the notes to these blog posts and articles are in the notes of this podcast. You just scroll down a bit in your podcast application and you will find all the links there.
So spin up account instance of IAM Identity Center if you want to start a site without touching your existing organization instance of IAM Identity Center.
Good point. I would say the local instance is the first step if you are planning to test and play with Identity Center trusted identity propagation. Pay attention to the configuration settings of the trusted identity propagation. So I would say my recommendation to developers is get your IDP issued token, open it, see the issuer, the audience, all those attributes in your token, and then configure your tip in Identity Center. This will make your life easier to see what's happening and test. I would say go ahead, play with it. It's a great feature. I'm very excited to see this growing in our customer base.
So looking ahead, what future enhancements or integrations can developers listening expect for trusted identity propagation? Do you have any exciting roadmap items that you can share with our listeners? Or if you can't share anything, can you tell me something exciting that you've seen people use this for out in the wild?
Yeah, I would say in terms of features, you would see more and more analytics services using this because it's a feature for end users. So you want to have fine-grained access control of your users into your applications. So we're going to see more and more customers using Redshift, SageMaker, Athena, and so on. And a QuickSight, of course. That's another end user analytics tool. I would say the future, it's probably this be a
No, I think once you get to know trusted identity propagation and the flow, you can see a lot of ways where you can implement it to improve your security posture. So if you're building analytics solutions, I was working with a software, a common software in the finance industry, and they didn't already implement trusted identity propagation like Tableau is doing. But it was easy to show them how to implement it themselves. So the customer was able to quickly implement it, the same mechanism, using the same flow, and now you're benefiting from trusted identity propagation for secure access to their data without having the ISV providing it yet. And I'm looking forward the ISV implementing it.
Yeah, that would be interesting to see what vendors are going to bring to that space and how they are going to integrate trusted identity propagation. So that's the technology that allows to bring the end user identity down to the data service that are providing the data on AWS, like S3, EMR, Athena, and the other that we mentioned, with the benefits of simplifying the user experience. If I summarize our talk, simplifying auditability, we know who is actually behind the keyboard, and simplifying the roles and the IAM permissions. Thank you, Joseph Leclerc, your consultant from ProServe, based in Montreal, Canada, and Raphael Koike, based in Atlanta, solution architect. Thank you, Brooke, for having co-hosted this episode. Next week, we are going to talk about something exciting as well. It's generative AI and how it can be useful for developers, how developers can improve their productivity using generative AI tools, more specifically on AWS. But now, go build.